Epictetus discovered a discipline so brutal, so uncompromising, so effective at destroying human weakness, that even modern Stoic teachers refuse to teach it in its original form, sanitizing it into comfortable platitudes that miss the terrifying power of what this former slave actually practiced and preached. This isn't the gentle philosophy of acceptance that gets quoted on Instagram. This is a systematic method of psychological warfare against your own limitations, a deliberate program of mental conditioning that transforms soft, dependent, emotionally fragile people into beings of such inner strength that external circumstances become powerless to disturb their peace or derail their purpose. Epictetus didn't just survive the most extreme form of human degradation, literal slavery and physical disability. He used these experiences to forge a discipline that made him more free than the emperors who owned him, more powerful than the politicians who commanded armies, more unbreakable than the warriors who conquered nations. But here's what makes this discipline forbidden in modern times. It requires you to voluntarily embrace everything that contemporary society teaches you to avoid. It demands that you deliberately seek out the very experiences that most people spend their lives running from, and it transforms weakness into strength through a process so intense that only those with absolute commitment to becoming unbreakable can endure it without breaking first. This discipline doesn't make you feel better about your weaknesses. It systematically eliminates them by exposing you to controlled doses of everything you fear until fear itself becomes impossible. It doesn't teach you to cope with difficulty. It makes you immune to difficulty by making difficulty your natural habitat, your training ground, your source of strength rather than your source of suffering. If you're ready to discover Epictetus's forbidden discipline that kills weakness at its root and transforms you into someone who cannot be broken by any external circumstance, smash that like button, share this life-changing knowledge with someone strong enough to handle the truth, comment below about what weakness you're ready to destroy forever, and subscribe to this channel for more forbidden wisdom that will forge you into mental steel. Epictetus wrote these words that scholars have tried to soften for centuries, but which reveal the brutal core of his forbidden discipline. Don't explain your philosophy, embody it. But what Epictetus meant by embodiment was far more extreme than modern interpretations suggest. He meant that you must deliberately place yourself in situations where your philosophy will be tested to its absolute limits, where your weaknesses will be exposed mercilessly, where your comfortable illusions will be shattered completely, and where you will either break under pressure or emerge stronger than you ever imagined possible. The forbidden discipline that Epictetus practiced and taught is called Prosoche, which translates roughly as attention or vigilance, but the full meaning encompasses something far more demanding: the constant, relentless, moment-by-moment practice of confronting reality exactly as it is, rather than as you wish it were, combined with the systematic exposure to everything that triggers your weakness until that weakness is burned away completely. The discipline operates on 3 levels, each more challenging than the last, each designed to eliminate a different category of human weakness. The first level kills the weakness of attachment by deliberately exposing you to loss. The second level kills the weakness of emotional reactivity by deliberately exposing you to provocation. The third level kills the weakness of identity by deliberately exposing you to humiliation. Together, these 3 levels create a human being who cannot be controlled, manipulated, or broken, because they have voluntarily experienced and mastered everything that could be used against them. Let me tell you about Marcus, a modern man who accidentally discovered this discipline through circumstances that forced him to confront every weakness he possessed simultaneously. Marcus was a successful attorney who had built his entire identity around being respected, needed, and in control. He had the prestigious law firm, the expensive home, the perfect family, the social status that came with professional success. Marcus thought he was strong because he had never been truly tested, never faced real adversity, never experienced the kind of loss that reveals what you're actually made of beneath the comfortable exterior. Then, in a single month, everything collapsed. Marcus was diagnosed with a degenerative neurological condition that would eventually rob him of his physical capabilities. His law firm partnership was dissolved due to financial irregularities that weren't his fault, but destroyed his reputation anyway. His wife left him, taking their children and half his assets. His friends disappeared when his status and usefulness evaporated. Marcus went from being envied to being pitied, from being powerful to being powerless, from having everything to having essentially nothing except his dignity, and even that felt fragile. Marcus's first response was what most people do when their comfortable world shatters: denial, anger, bargaining, depression. The classic stages of grief played out over months of steadily declining circumstances. He hired lawyers to fight battles he couldn't win, doctors to cure what couldn't be cured, therapists to help him accept what felt unacceptable. But none of these conventional approaches provided real strength because they were all attempts to avoid or minimize pain rather than learn from it. Then Marcus discovered Epictetus through a random book recommendation, and something in the former slave's words resonated with his situation in a way that all the professional help had not. Epictetus had faced literal ownership by another human being, physical disability, social rejection, yet had emerged not just unbroken but stronger than those who had tried to break him. Marcus realized that his current situation, as devastating as it felt, was actually an opportunity to develop the kind of strength that can only be forged in the fire of loss and uncertainty. Marcus began practicing the first level of Epictetus's forbidden discipline, deliberate exposure to attachment loss. Instead of fighting to keep what remained of his old life, Marcus began systematically releasing his grip on everything he had been clinging to. He sold his expensive possessions not because he had to, but because he chose to discover who he was without them. He stopped trying to rebuild his professional reputation and instead explored what gave his life meaning beyond external validation. He ceased trying to win back his wife and children through desperate gestures and instead focused on becoming someone worthy of love rather than someone who needed love to feel complete. This wasn't passive acceptance or resigned defeat. This was active training and detachment, deliberately practicing the loss of everything he had been attached to, so that actual loss couldn't devastate him. Marcus discovered that the anticipation and fear of losing things was far more painful than actually losing them, because once something was gone, you could no longer worry about losing it. The first level of the discipline had taught him that attachment to outcomes was the source of his weakness, and releasing attachment was the beginning of real strength. The second level of Epictetus's forbidden discipline involves systematic exposure to emotional provocation until reactivity itself dies. Marcus began practicing this by deliberately seeking out situations that would have previously triggered his anger, frustration, or defensive responses. He volunteered to work with difficult people who tested his patience. He placed himself in circumstances where he might be criticized, rejected, or treated disrespectfully. He practiced receiving bad news, unfair treatment, and social disapproval without allowing his emotional state to be determined by external events. This wasn't masochism or self-punishment. This was psychological conditioning designed to eliminate the automatic emotional reactions that make people weak and predictable. Marcus learned that his emotions were not caused by events themselves, but by his judgments about events, and that he could change his judgments through deliberate practice. Someone insulting him couldn't make him angry unless he agreed that the insult was important, meaningful, or threatening to something he valued. Someone rejecting him couldn't make him feel inadequate unless he believed that their approval was necessary for his self-worth. Through months of deliberate exposure to emotional triggers, Marcus developed something that most people never achieve: complete emotional independence. His peace of mind no longer depended on others treating him well. His self-respect no longer required external validation. His happiness no longer fluctuated based on circumstances beyond his control. Marcus had killed the weakness of reactivity by repeatedly exposing himself to provocation until his nervous system learned that external events were not actual threats to his well-being. The third level of Epictetus's forbidden discipline is the most challenging: systematic exposure to humiliation until ego death occurs. This doesn't mean seeking out genuine degradation or allowing yourself to be abused. It means deliberately placing yourself in situations where your social image, your need to appear successful or impressive, your investment in others' opinions of you will be challenged and ultimately revealed as illusions that were making you weak. Marcus practiced this level by taking jobs that were beneath his previous status, by admitting his failures publicly instead of hiding them, by allowing himself to be seen as ordinary rather than special, by engaging in activities where he was a beginner rather than an expert. He discovered that his entire sense of self had been built on a foundation of social comparison and external validation, and that this foundation was not just unreliable, but was actually the source of most of his suffering. When Marcus stopped needing to be seen as successful, impressive, or special, he became truly free because there was nothing others could threaten him with. They couldn't humiliate him because he was no longer invested in maintaining an image. They couldn't diminish him because his self-worth was no longer based on comparison with others. They couldn't control him through social pressure because he no longer needed society's approval to feel valuable. Marcus had completed Epictetus's forbidden discipline and emerged as someone completely different from who he had been before his world collapsed. Not different in terms of external circumstances, which remained challenging due to his health condition and reduced social status, but different in terms of internal strength, resilience, and freedom. He had become unbreakable not because nothing could hurt him, but because he had systematically eliminated everything within himself that could be hurt by external circumstances. This is why Epictetus's discipline is forbidden in modern times. It requires facing everything that contemporary culture teaches people to avoid. We're told to seek comfort, but the discipline demands discomfort. We're taught to pursue pleasure, but the discipline requires embracing pain. We're encouraged to build self-esteem, but the discipline destroys ego. We're advised to avoid stress, but the discipline seeks out challenge. Every principle of modern self-care and mental health is contradicted by Epictetus' method, because modern approaches try to make weakness more comfortable, while Epictetus's approach eliminates weakness entirely. Let me share the story of Rebecca, a woman who discovered this discipline through professional failure and social rejection. Rebecca was a social media influencer who had built her career and identity around being liked, admired, and envied by thousands of followers. Her entire sense of self-worth was tied to metrics: likes, comments, shares, subscriber counts. Rebecca thought she was successful because she had external validation, but she was actually profoundly weak because her emotional state depended entirely on factors beyond her control. Then Rebecca posted something that triggered a massive backlash. What she thought was inspirational content was interpreted as insensitive and offensive by a significant portion of her audience. The criticism was swift, brutal, and public. Rebecca watched her follower count plummet, her brand partnerships disappear, her social status evaporate in real time. She went from being celebrated to being canceled, from being influential to being irrelevant, from being loved to being hated by thousands of strangers. Rebecca's initial response was panic, desperate attempts to apologize, explain, and win back approval. She hired public relations experts, crafted carefully worded statements, tried every strategy to repair her damaged reputation. But nothing worked because the internet had moved on to new targets, new controversies, new sources of outrage. Rebecca was left with the devastating realization that the validation she had depended on could disappear instantly and arbitrarily. In her desperation, Rebecca discovered Epictetus and realized that her situation was actually an opportunity to practice the forbidden discipline that could free her from the tyranny of external approval forever. Instead of trying to rebuild her online reputation, Rebecca began using her experience as training in emotional independence. She practiced reading criticism without defensive reactions, receiving rejection without self-pity, being ignored without feeling worthless. Rebecca deliberately exposed herself to more criticism by posting content she knew would be unpopular, not to be provocative, but to practice maintaining her equilibrium regardless of others' responses. She trained herself to find sources of meaning and fulfillment that didn't depend on external validation, developing skills and interests that brought intrinsic satisfaction rather than social reward. She learned to derive her sense of self-worth from internal values rather than external metrics. Through months of practicing Epictetus's discipline, Rebecca transformed from someone who was enslaved by others' opinions into someone who was completely free from the need for approval. She didn't rebuild her social media career because she no longer needed external validation to feel valuable. She didn't try to regain her influence because she had discovered that true power comes from not needing power over others. Rebecca had used her public humiliation as raw material for developing unshakable inner strength. Epictetus understood this principle from his own experience of slavery and disability. He couldn't control his external circumstances, couldn't change his social status or physical limitations, but he could control his responses to these circumstances, and that control was the foundation of a freedom that no external authority could grant or revoke. He wrote, "You are not your circumstances, you are your choices." But the deeper meaning is that the choice to remain unbroken by circumstances is always available, regardless of what those circumstances might be. The forbidden nature of this discipline becomes clear when you realize its implications for social control. People who have practiced systematic exposure to loss cannot be controlled through threats of deprivation. People who have mastered emotional independence cannot be manipulated through triggering their reactions. People who have killed their ego through voluntary humiliation cannot be controlled through social pressure or status concerns. Epictetus's discipline creates individuals who are essentially uncontrollable because they have eliminated within themselves everything that external forces typically use to control people. Let me tell you about David, a man who practiced this discipline through voluntary simplicity and social invisibility. David was a corporate executive who realized that his comfortable lifestyle was making him weak and dependent. He had everything that society defines as success, but he felt like a fraud because he knew that his confidence depended on his circumstances remaining favorable. His happiness depended on others treating him well, and his sense of security depended on factors completely outside his control. David decided to practice Epictetus's discipline by systematically stripping away everything that he had been using as psychological crutches. He moved from his expensive home to a small apartment, sold his luxury car and used public transportation, began shopping at thrift stores instead of designer boutiques, ate simple meals instead of fine dining. This wasn't about saving money. It was about discovering who he was when external markers of success were removed. David also practiced social invisibility, deliberately choosing to be unremarkable rather than impressive. He stopped trying to dominate conversations, stopped name-dropping or showing off his achievements, stopped seeking attention or admiration from others. He learned to be comfortable being overlooked, ignored, considered ordinary. This was psychological training designed to eliminate his dependence on social validation and external recognition. The third aspect of David's practice involved accepting disrespect and criticism without defensive reactions. He volunteered for positions where he might be criticized, placed himself in situations where others might treat him poorly, practiced receiving negative feedback without arguing or explaining. David was training himself to be unaffected by others' opinions because he understood that the need to be well regarded by everyone was a form of slavery that made him vulnerable to manipulation. Through years of practicing Epictetus's forbidden discipline, David developed something remarkable: complete inner security that didn't depend on external circumstances. He could be happy in luxury or poverty, confident whether he was praised or criticized, at peace whether he was included or excluded. David had achieved what Epictetus called autarky, complete self-sufficiency not in terms of material needs, but in terms of psychological well-being. This transformation didn't make David passive or resigned. It made him incredibly effective because he was no longer paralyzed by fears of loss, failure, or social rejection. He could take risks that others couldn't take because he wasn't attached to maintaining what he had. He could speak truthfully in situations where others would remain silent because he wasn't afraid of disapproval. He could pursue meaningful goals without being distracted by the need for recognition because his sense of purpose came from internal values rather than external rewards. The ultimate secret of Epictetus's forbidden discipline is that it doesn't just eliminate weakness. It reveals the strength that was always present, but obscured by the illusions that create weakness. You don't become strong through this practice. You discover that you were always strong but had forgotten your strength while focusing on protecting vulnerabilities that existed only in your imagination. The discipline strips away everything false about your self-concept until only what is real remains. And what is real is far more powerful than anything that can be threatened or taken away. Epictetus wrote, "No one can hurt you without your permission." But the full implication is that when you withdraw your permission to be hurt by external circumstances, you don't just become invulnerable, you become unstoppable. The energy that was previously wasted on defending against imaginary threats becomes available for pursuing authentic goals. the attention that was scattered by reactive emotions becomes focused on what actually matters. The strength that was hidden by unnecessary fears becomes fully accessible for creating the life you actually want, rather than protecting the life you're afraid of losing. When you complete Epictetus's forbidden discipline, you realize why it had to be hidden from those who aren't ready for its demands. It creates people who cannot be controlled, manipulated, or defeated by conventional means because they have voluntarily faced and mastered everything that could be used against them. They become dangerous not because they seek to harm others, but because they cannot be harmed by others. And people who cannot be harmed cannot be controlled. And people who cannot be controlled cannot be enslaved by systems that depend on fear, attachment, and ego to maintain power over human behavior. The discipline kills weakness by eliminating the illusions that create weakness. The illusion that your happiness depends on circumstances. The illusion that your worth depends on others' opinions. The illusion that your security depends on controlling what cannot be controlled. When these illusions die, what remains is your true nature, which is already strong, already free, already unbreakable, and has always been waiting for you to stop protecting what didn't need protection and start expressing the power that can never be threatened because it doesn't depend on anything external for its existence or effectiveness.